Going to be taking a look at a Zerg strategy today. And on this particular replay, our Zerg player is Cuba, and our Protoss opponent is Saki. So again, this is a Zerg strategy, and what we're going to be taking a look at today is going with an aggressive, heavy Roach playstyle. Essentially, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be researching Roaches. We're going to be getting our Roaches and researching their speed upgrade, the Glial Reconstitution, and using that, it's going to be very effective against a Protoss opponent who's going for that 4 Warp Gate build. Now, in seeing that heavy Roach build, the Protoss opponent does eventually respond with Immortals. That is a smart response, but what we're going to be doing is we're going to try to play very aggressively and try to force our opponent to stay on one base, basically denying them that expansion. And in doing so, they're actually not going to be able to properly afford a 4 Warp Gate and Robo build. It's just too much off of one base. So the idea is to get those Roaches, mass them up, and play very aggressively with them. Try to force your opponent to stay on one base, and in doing so, it's going to be hard for them to get sufficient Warp Gate forces as well as those Immortals from that robotics facility. And with an expansion of your own, you should be able to overpower them with that build. So again, this is going to work primarily against a Protoss opponent who opens up with that 4 Warp Gate build. That's pretty popular against Zerg opponents, so it is something you are likely to see in your own games. So starting out with this build order here, we're basically starting off with getting a spawning pool at 14 supply, and we're actually going to be fast expanding after that, getting a hatchery at 15 supply. Now, as you can see, we are scouting our opponent's base. We do have this Overlord just moseying about. Luckily, our Protoss opponent was in the nearest position to us on this particular map, so we're able to get a full scout with just the Overlord early on. We're checking for that assimilator. It is in fact there, so in seeing that, we do know that we shouldn't really expect any sort of a 2-gate zealot push early on in the game. And now that we don't have to worry about that, basically we can keep our Overlord here up until the point that we see a Cybernetics core up, and a Stalker is going to be out immediately after that. So up until that point, you can keep the Overlord in there, get as much scouting information as possible. As you can see, like I mentioned earlier, we are dropping that hatchery at 15 supply, going for that fast expansion. Going to be vulnerable early on, so we do need to make sure we make enough units to protect that. Followed that up with an extractor at 14 supply, also started getting our queen at 14 supply as well. Now at this point, we're going to want to saturate this extractor. We're going to need to mass up our Vespene. We're in fact going to be looking to tech up to a Lair very quickly in the game. This is going to allow us to get that speed upgrade for our Roaches. Basically, Roaches are slower than Stalkers initially, but with that speed upgrade, you are able to at least close the gap at least a little bit. Also, the other thing to note is that the range on the Roaches is smaller than that of a Stalker, so you really need that speed upgrade if you're going to go for a heavy Roach build in order to be effective, and in order to research that speed upgrade, we need a Lair. So that is in fact why we're going to be spending our first 100 Vespene on getting that Lair as quickly as possible, so we can go ahead and again get that speed upgrade for our Roaches. So there you go, that Lair is going down. At this point, our Protoss opponent does have that wall off, so we're not going to be able to sneak in there to get any more scouting information at this point. We can try to creep in with an Overlord to sacrifice it. That is certainly a good idea. Also, in your first push, if you are able to break through that front wall, you're going to be able to see fully what your opponent has. As you can see here, the expansion is finally up, so we're going to start to get that saturated as soon as possible. Again, we do need some sort of early defense, so we're getting these Zerglings. I highly suggest at least pulling one of your Zerglings and having it sit on the Zelnaga tower, especially if your opponent is in this near of a position to you. You're going to be able to see any push or early aggression that comes from your opponent if you just have one sitting on this tower. As you can see, our Zerg player here, Cuba, does go ahead and do that in fact. Scouting probe coming from our opponent. Try to deny any scouting information. Pull your queen to the ramp so it can attack the probe before it's able to pull into your base. That is ideally what you're going to look to do. Now, as you can see, our Lair is just finishing right now, and our Roach Warren is just about up as well. Sorry I hadn't made note of that. We did start researching, or started building that at 28 supply, in fact. I'm trying to push into our opponent's base with these Zerglings to see what he has. Unfortunately, again, he had that wall off. He's going to be able to repel us pretty easily. Kind of just running alongside of him. We really have no threat. We do have to worry, of course, about that sentry's range, but we do outrun them. We do have a faster speed, so we can definitely pull forward with that. Seeing that push, we went ahead and dropped this spine crawler down. Also, our Roach Warren is complete, so going to be getting up these Roaches. And again, this is what we're looking to do, get that Glial Reconstitution. That's really the only way these Roaches are going to be effective against a 4-gate build from your Protoss opponent, because otherwise those Stalkers can basically just kite around your Roaches all day. But with that increased speed, you're certainly going to be able to catch up to them and once you get within range, that again, that range 3 that these roaches have, you're going to be able to take them out. So this early push from a 4-gate build is going to be dangerous, but since we do have these roaches and that speed upgrade just about done, we should be able to fend it off. Again, try to keep your queen alive as much as possible. Use that transfuse ability if necessary. Getting blocked off from these force fields, that can be incredibly annoying. So any units that you build to try to help defend, make sure you do it in this particular hatchery. If you have both hatcheries hotkeyed to the same building, you want to make sure at the very least that the roaches you build are coming out of this one. Something else to note too, if he's very stalker heavy, you may just want to get some Zerglings out as well, because they can get a nice surround on those stalkers and basically hold them in place while your roaches pick them off. So here you go, we're able to fend off that attack. That force field wall has stopped at this point. And at this point, you know, with that speed upgrade now finished, we're going to be able to push out. Scouting here, checking here for that proxy pylon. We did in fact find one. A lot of players will put proxy pylons at these expansions near your base in this particular map, so definitely want to check for that. Another popular location is back there as well, kind of hidden. So as you can see though, with this speed upgrade, our roaches are able to catch up to the stalkers. That really is the key there. And here's this likely transition that I told you about. Our Protoss player was seeing that, although obviously at this point we don't have that actual scouting information, but just know that this is a likely response, getting that robotics facility, in seeing this heavy roach army. The only way really for you to counteract that, aside from a tech switch, if you want to stay with this heavy roach aggression, is to keep him contained and stop him from expanding. So you need to play very aggressively in going for this build. If you allow him to get on 2 bases, he will then at that point be able to support both the 4 warp gates and the robotics facility producing immortals. But if you can keep him on 1 base, he just won't have the necessary resources to do both at the same time. Now we are finally confirmed of that 4 warp gate build here. So going for these mass roaches again is going to do really well against that. Obviously, ideally, you would like to get the scouting information prior to this point, but I mean, it worked in this particular game. There's no reason it shouldn't be able to work for you as well. Just be wary that any early heavy immortal build you're going to be in a really tough bind against. But the thing to know is that a lot of players do go for a 4-gate push against Zerg because it can be very effective. So going for this heavy and aggressive roach build can do very well for you. So at this point, as you can see, we are just massing up roaches. I'm also going to be pumping out some drones, working on our econ, trying to stay as aggressive as possible, keep our opponent contained, basically cut them off and suffocate them in terms of economy, stop them from getting enough resources to be able to support the production buildings that they have built in these 4 warp gates and robotics facility. And if you can do so, going for this heavy roach build with the speed upgrade is going to do very well for you. Also note that you do have the option of transitioning at any point if you can stay aggressive and keep them contained. In doing this, you are able to transition. For example, you could get a Spire and look to get some Mutalisks to do some mineral harassment. Staying with this aggressive roach and keeping them inside of their base as much as possible, in conjunction with getting a Spire. As you can see here, our Zerg player Cuba did in fact go for that Spire. That's going to allow you to just completely harass them and basically cripple them at that point if you can keep them contained. Of course, the threat at this point is heavy immortals coming out. Do note, you know, if you can keep your scouting up, maybe sacrifice an overlord, or maybe even change one into an overseer and drop a changeling in his base. If you see a really heavy immortal push coming out, do a quick tech switch to Zerglings. Especially if you can have Speedlings on the board, if you do get that Speedling upgrade, which I highly suggest. Cuba did in fact neglect to do that, but I highly suggest getting that just in case, basically as a preemptive measure. Getting that Speedling upgrade will allow you to quick tech switch to Speedlings, basically a degrade in tech, but still very effective. Heavy Immortals Speedlings will do very well against those, so just something to be aware of. But the key thing to note, a little bit of miss micro there, the key thing to note is that staying very aggressive with these roaches against a Protoss player who's going for that 4-gate, if you can force them, again, to stay on 1 base, you'll do very well with this build. You want to make sure you get that speed upgrade once more. That is very crucial to this. As you can see, he's pushing forward with that primarily mix of 4-gate units, only a few immortals at this point. Since we have that speed upgrade, we're able to catch up to those stalkers and take them out pretty easily. Something else to note here, getting this burrow, this can be very effective. 2 things you can do. You can use it to ambush with your roaches, basically burrow them in a position, wait for your opponent's army to pass over, and then unburrow right when you're underneath them. That's going to be very effective. It'll